So viewers, first of all, I would like to thank you, ma'am, that you accept our request, and in spite of having a busy schedule, you accept our request and gave you a valuable time. So viewers, I'd like to introduce you, ma'am. So our guest speaker is Dr. Tiffany Roy, ma'am, and she is well known for her tremendous work in the field of forensic science. She's the CEO of Forensic Aid, and she's the author of Criminalistics Edition 13. She has also She's also an investigator, law enforcement personnel, and attends on the complexities of science of the law. Ma'am, what can I say? You are a very big personality, and I'm really feeling honored, and I'm really feeling happy that I'm taking the interview. So, ma'am, over to you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I just want to say a few things. I'm not actually a doctor. I have a law degree and a Master of Science degree. And I've worked in law enforcement, and I teach and I write textbooks, but I no longer work in law enforcement. I'm more of an independent forensic scientist now. So I've had experience doing all those things, but now I primarily just work independently, and my focus is on forensic education and trainings.
Okay, so ma'am, moving to our questions. So first question is like, ma'am, you have been spending a lot of time in this forensic field. So throughout the course of the journey, what are the differences in time far back then and now, and how they have influenced in the course of investigation as a whole?
So over the course of my career, what's changed most about forensic biology is that the technology has gotten much more sensitive. So we're able to detect DNA profiles now from just a few cells worth of DNA. And that wasn't the case early on in my career, but that is the case now. So that's changed many things about how we interpret DNA, about things that we are able to report. One of those differences is that now we are moving away from manual interpretation, where an analyst looks at the DNA profile and makes a comparison to a known person, and we're moving towards computer programs who can make some of those analysis in a more mathematical way for us, and that's called probabilistic genotyping. Another difference is that we have to be very careful about not just who we're comparing it to, and statements that we're making what I would consider to be source level in the hierarchy of propositions. We also must now consider how the DNA came to be on that place, could have transferred from a secondary transfer, or some secondary mode, rather than contact with a particular item. So that's one consideration that many forensic scientists around the world are making. Not just who the DNA belonged to, but how the DNA could have come to be on that item, and making evaluations about the activity that may have caused that.
Okay, so ma'am, which one is easier, like the past days or like this recent days? Which is easier to find the DNA report? Like,
I think it was simpler. It was simpler in the beginning, when we just had DNA profiles from blood or semen or saliva. When you have a body fluid and there's a lot of DNA, and usually it's from one person or a mixture of two people, that's much easier to interpret. And now that we can detect DNA from just a few skin cells from maybe many, many different people, it's much more complex.
Ma'am, do you think like in the past days people were not aware of DNA test and all this tech? They could, they could have left their traces in the crime scenes. That's why the cases were easier in the past, and now the people are more aware of DNA tests and all. That's why the criminals were more aware, like leaving traces in the crime scene. What do you think about it?
I think that There is certainly more of a public awareness about DNA, but the technology is advanced so that even if people try very hard not to leave traces behind, they often still do, even when they don't intend to. Even as careful as they try to be, we can often find ways to detect their DNA because the technology has gotten so sensitive. So it's very difficult for them to elude us in that way.
Okay, so like our technology is like far advanced from the criminals. That's a really good, good advanced. Okay, so ma'am, this is a really informative answer. So moving to our next questions. So as per you, what are the most important ingredients for becoming a forensic biologist or forensic expert?
So, my most important attributes, I would say it's good for a forensic scientist, forensic biologist to be very organized and very detail oriented. And there are different, I think, attributes that are good for maybe somebody who is a researcher, who is doing forensic science research versus someone who is as a practitioner. So research scientists need to have good laboratory skills, and they need to understand data and how to identify trends in data and be familiar with statistics. I would say that practitioners also need to have good laboratory skills. They need to be neat and orderly, but they also have to be good teachers. We have an adversarial system here in the States, and oftentimes when forensic experts are going to give evidence, they have to teach the judge or they have to teach the jury, and they have to be able to explain very simply what they did and what their results are. So I think that's another attribute that is very important to be a forensic biologist. And then I think basic understanding of the biology that's involved. And I think now that we're moving toward computer programs, it would be best to have scientists, forensic biologists who understand computers and computer science as well as complicated statistics. So that's becoming more and more important. And also, I think just a general flexibility and open-mindedness, because when I started to test DNA profiles, things were very different. And over the course of just my career is not very long, but things change very rapidly and we make advancements very quickly. And so a forensic scientist has to always be willing to learn and to adopt new technology and to change when it's necessary to do things a little bit better.
Okay, so ma'am, that's really informative. So moving to our next questions. The question is, as you are the author of Criminalistics Edition 13, what was your biggest inspiration for the same?
So my inspiration for criminalistics was Dr. Richard Saperstein, who was the prior author of the textbook, and he wrote much of the information about general information about the field. He was a very brilliant man who had a knack for teaching. He was a great teacher, and he had the ability to make things very simple.
Absolutely.
So he was really my inspiration. I began to work with him, and he taught me, how to do this and how to write in a clear way. And one thing he was always very interested in was advancements in the field. So every time there was something new and interesting, he would always want to include that in his textbook very early on to make sure he could teach the community and get that out to the community. So Richard was a big inspiration. And I think what he saw in me that I would be good to carry on the textbook was my desire to learn and continue to learn, and my interest in always wanting to know what advancements were taking place and what new trends were happening in the field. And it's very important, I think, in forensics that you always continue to learn. It's lifelong learning, and you always have to read the research, and you should always take courses because things are going to change. And if you stop learning, the field will pass you by, and there will be things that you don't know, and you will become obsolete. So I think that's really my inspiration for criminalistics. It keeps me continually learning. I'm always reading to know, what should I include in the textbook? What's the new thing? Like forensic
Yes.
genealogy right now is
Mm-hmm.
a big thing. So, that's something when we did this new edition, I wanted to ensure that we would include information about that and get that out to the community so they would be aware of it. So just knowing what's on the forefront, but also explaining it simply in a way that many people can understand.
Yeah, ma'am. Actually, I have seen your video in the, introducing the book, and it was really good, and it, it is attempting that we should also read that book. It was really good, and thank you, ma'am, for this informative answer. So, moving to our next questions. Uh, you have such a great experience with laboratory works related to the fields, as well as giving testimonial evidence in the court of law. So, as for you, what are the challenges faced by a forensic biologist while referring to investigating the fact under considerations, as well as while providing testimony?
So I think the challenges, different challenges in the lab and different challenges in testimony, but I've always found the lab work to be challenging because it's very sensitive. It's very particular. You need to be very organized and it's easy to make mistakes.
Yes, yes.
So I always found the lab work to be very stressful. But I think that testimony is challenging in a different way. It's also can be very stressful. And one challenge that has always been, something that I've tried very hard to get better at is explaining the mathematics. And I don't know how things are done in India, but here in the United States, if we're going to say a person matches a DNA profile that we found at a crime scene, or if someone included in a mixture from a piece of evidence, then we would have to attach some type of statistical weight to that to tell the jury how strong or weak the evidence is. And explaining how we do that is often very challenging because it's math and many people don't like math or don't understand math, and it's difficult to make math simple when it's not your area of expertise. I'm a biologist, so explaining math was very different for me. And so this is always an intimidating area of the testimony, but something that's very important to understand the mathematical calculations that we're using in our analysis and to be able to explain those to people who might not understand them.
Yes, ma'am. So moving to our next questions. As per you, what are the current shortcomings of the system while considering the aspect of forensics?
So I think forensic science in general, there are a few things I think we could be doing better. I think there needs to be more oversight in the United States, but I think each country should set up a way oversee the field like we oversee medicine and like we oversee law. Many lawyers are licensed and they have, you have to take a test in order to practice, and doctors as well. I think forensic scientists should also have some type of certification or minimum qualifications in a test that they have to take in some way, that if they have practiced outside of their expertise or they've done something unethical, then we have some method to stop them from doing that in the future. And there is no such thing that exists now in the United States, and that's very frustrating to me because there have been some pretty significant issues from people misinterpreting forensic evidence. So I think there's a lack of oversight, and we need a central body to set standards and guidelines for the field for all labs to follow. Right now, I understand that it's, every lab likes to do things just a little bit differently, and I can understand that, but I think there needs to be more standardization and more uniformity in the language we're using, in the structure of our reports, so that people can look at a report from one place and understand what it means, and look at a report from another place and have it be substantially similar and have it mean the same thing and use the same words. So I think there should be more standardization.
Okay.
One area where I think there's a lot of research now that I think we can make improvements in is cognitive biases. And I think sometimes people in highly educated fields like doctors or lawyers they can sometimes suffer from cognitive biases like the expert effect, where they never really consider that they may be doing something incorrectly, or maybe there's something they understand incompletely. And I think that forensic scientists need to sort of, you know, we do have to have a great deal of confidence in order to present our findings in court, and the outcome of that could be very serious. But I think we also have to understand better what cognitive biases are and how that's influencing our work as scientists and as a field. Additional funding for training, and everyone should be trained about these things, and there should be as much training as forensic scientists are willing to take. Like I said, continuing education is the cornerstone of a successful forensic scientist and a just criminal justice system. So the better the understanding of the scientists and the better their education and training, the better the system will be.
Okay, so ma'am, thank you so much. So moving to our next questions. What was the most challenging case of your career today?
So I had a case a couple years ago where a police officer was killed, and there were 3 individuals who were being investigated as having taken part in that crime. And this was a case I did not work for the government. I didn't work for the prosecutor. I was working for the defense attorney to look at the evidence and make sure that the prosecution's experts were using best practices, and they were using methods that would be accepted in the field of science. And in that review, I found that some of the methods that were used by some of the particular experts, not always the government experts, but maybe even private experts that were retained by the government to do some work for them, they were not doing things correctly. And I found it very difficult to convince the judge that these government experts maybe were not doing things correctly. They had, education credentials and very experienced. And even though I knew that the science wasn't correct, to a layperson, that was very persuasive. And they looked at this person with a lot of trust. Difficult for me to try to convince them that, something may be wrong.
Okay. Okay. So we have a last question. So, ma'am, there is a phrase known for you that forensic science is in your blood. What are your views on the saying?
So I think that you can have a passion for forensic science and you can be very interested in it, but at its base, it's still a science. And any science requires research and study. And so when you commit to a life of forensic science as a career, then you must commit to the study of forensic science. And it's really learned. So nothing, all of the skill in forensic science doesn't come in your blood. It comes from your training. It comes from your education and your commitment to that. So you might be interested in it, and it's great to be passionate about it because that will make the learning much easier and more pleasurable. But in the end, it's always going to be that hard work. You have to practice. I was not as skilled in the beginning of my career as I would consider myself now. And my knowledge base was not the same as it is now. And even though I loved it then, and I love it now, it's the commitment to learning and to bettering your skills and improving your skills that make you successful and that make you a better scientist. So I would say it's fine to have an interest in forensic science and a passion for forensic science in your blood, but your skills from forensic science come from your dedication to learning your craft.
Yes, ma'am. So actually, ma'am, our questions are complete, but personally, I want to ask you that what was the thing that you attracted to this course? Like, what was the interest? In our country, we have shows like detective shows. By watching this shows, watching that shows, we got interested. Like, we also want to do that. So, what was your inspiration, or what was your interest that time?
Mine was It was a TV show. So in the States, we have one. It's
Okay.
called Forensic Files. And I saw it when I was in college. And when I was at university, I decided that's what I want to do. And so that's the career I pursued. But it was TV.
Okay, so ma'am, thank you so much. The interview was really informative.